Good evening. My name is David Okun. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody who have been helping me, who have been subscribing to the channel, everybody who have been sharing this video. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for leaving a comment. We have been talking about the cost of living. We have been linking the cost of living with different elements within the economy in Britain, in America, in the Western world, in every part of the world. This is because the cost of living is very important. It's a very important topic. It has been creating a crisis, and the governments of the world have been trying their best to help people in different ways. Money, help in kind. In some of the monies, some of the support have been helpful. Some of the support could have been better delivered, better provided, and this is what we're looking at. I've always said, whenever there is a problem, we need to identify the problem in order to solve every problem we face. We live in a world where there is always crisis, and crisis is an opportunity for you to go from one level in your life to the next. If you are actually a working class, which is most people of the world are working class, the middle and the lower classes, and the cost of living is an income issue, but also a political problem. And people need to understand this. When we expect what the government give us, we need also to know that the government is intending for us to help ourselves a bit more. And we have been discussing this in this video, and people who have been participating with me, watching the videos, have been helping, have been linking the cost of living. Like I said, right now I'm talking about the 2007 and 2008 financial crisis, which began in America and created a lot of problem within the economy, and this is connected to the current cost of living we experience. That's why we are talking about it. We have been talking about different things, and if you watch the other videos, they are connected to this. And so what created the financial crisis in America, which actually also contributed to the current cost of living around the world, was when the United States of America failed to provide public housing to the people of America. And that is precisely the problem. They argued in this video and elsewhere that private companies cannot provide public service, and that was what caused the crisis in America, when the conservative government, the Republican Party in America, tried to provide public property, public housing via private financial instrumentations. And if you compare that with what is happening now with the cost of living, it is because whatever billions or even trillions of money the government, say in the UK or wherever in America, whenever the government tries to provide public service through the private sector, it fails, because the private sector also has vested interest in terms of making profit. So the government wastes a lot of money every time the government tries to provide public sector using private companies. The difficulties with the government is that the government is so complicated that politics and ideology normally, determine what the behavior of the government, and the ordinary people of a country normally suffer. If you take the immigration issue now, where there is a long backlog in the British situation, in the European situation, you ask yourself why the government promising to deal with the boat issue. Because boat issue is actually people who are coming illegally, or I don't know, mostly illegally, through on the boat. Maybe there are other factors like trafficking is happening in Europe, and these people are ending up in Britain, where I live. And the perspective of my conversation is Britain, but I try to link it with the world because of globalization. What happened in Britain and America, what happened in the Western world, happened across the globe. It's something called harmonization. This actually means the globe is trying to come together to link up activities and livelihood, experience, all sorts of experience, cultural development. All these factors are becoming global. That's why when I speak about Britain, pay close attention if you live in Britain, and also if you don't live in Britain, because what I say, affect Britain and also the rest of the world. And that's why I'm talking about the incidents which happened many years ago, between 2007 and 2008, financial crisis beginning in America. Because of globalization, it spread all over the globe, including in Britain. And my argument is that has been a fundamental basis, source of the current crisis, cost of living crisis. And I've also said that the theme of my discussion is actually crisis and displacement. People move. You move from poverty to. If you're already poor, you can only be poor, and if you are moving from poverty, you're probably moving from poverty to wealth. If you're poor, you move from being poor to being rich. But if you move the other way, probably you're dead. You move from being alive to being dead, because poverty is a very dangerous thing. It actually can kill people, and not only poverty, but also the emotional situation it produces, like health, physical health, mental health, the security issues, the cultural failure. Cultural failure is, from my point of view, is a fundamental source of violence. And when the government fails to help people, it's a form of violence. And violence is the opposite of peace. If you don't have peace in yourself, if you don't have peace in your family, community, society, it is because of violence. We're talking about domestic violence, we're talking about social violence, cultural violence, we talk about culture. If you're going to talk about culture, I'll probably talk about culture and social. You'll probably talk about things like religion, extremism. All these factors, I'm trying to create an awareness, because when we learn something, we become stronger and independent, and we become empowered. And the government of the world, especially the UK where I live, have consistently said they want people to start relying on themselves. They want the people to be responsible for their lives. So every time I make this video, I want to establish the logic of the video, the value of the video. For me, it has been very helpful to me personally to discover myself, to understand some of these situations, because I believe in hope. There is no life without hope, and it doesn't matter how the cost of living is a crisis is affecting you, there is always hope. And that's why I'm making this video, so that people actually believe in themselves, go away and play, do party, visit families, have fun. When the time comes, recollect, focus, pay attention to what you need to do, set your priorities, and do what you want to do. Visit family. But in the hand, if you want to succeed, you have to work very hard. Doesn't matter what you're doing, maybe cleaning the house, cooking, be the best cook if you like cooking, because it is healing. There's a lot of mental illness in societies, not just in Britain, not in Europe, across the globe. Mental illness is on the increase, and it's something we need to pay attention. If you're cleaning, doing little things like cleaning the house, or just making a cup of tea, value it. Nothing is cheapened. Nothing is to be neglected. It is your life. We do not know what the future holds. You cannot just sit and give up on your life. If you need to go back to school, it's really complicated to go to school. It's very challenging, very costly these days especially. But there is the internet, there is YouTube, there is social media. Learn what you can, play as much as you can, work as hard as you can, travel if you have the means, do whatever you want to do. Life is about balance, but if you always play and don't do any work, you get into trouble. And so let us go back to this topic, and the thing which created, we're going to look at how the financial crisis became a problem, and the financial crisis was global. It became global, something called global financial crisis. It was severe, it was worldwide, it created economic crisis, and this was considered the worst, the most severe economic crisis in the 21st century in this generation. And this was compared, commentators compared this crisis with the crisis of 1927, economic depression of 1927 and 1929. And that is actually by comparison to see, illustrate how bad it was. There is something called predatory lending, which targeted people on low income, people who are home buyers who wanted to buy property to live in, people who did not have money, who wanted to live in a house. And like I said previously, these were actually people on low income, lenders who are predatory. If you are predatory in your behavior, you're behaving like wild animal. Wild animal chasing a prey. The opposite of predation is actually which means there is a prey. So poor people become a prey, and lenders who are actually normally multimillionaires and multi-billionaires become prey. They become predators. So they become like hunters who are hunting animals to feed on. That's how sometimes the market behaves. The market behaves like a jungle. It's a sense of lawlessness. When we talk of predation, when we talk of predatory lending, which targeting the weak, we are looking at animalistic format of behavior, human being behaving like animals, and without any care. Because when you look at animals who are hunting their prey, predators hunting their prey, we look at their behavior, they target the weak, people who are animals which are weak. so that they can catch them quickly. So it is ruthless, it's jungle-like. We will talk in the 21st century. We're supposed to be discussing civilization, and here you find a financial institution, the market environment, a system of capitalism where traders, whether participants, actually behave like wild animals. This is a cultural breakdown by evidence. And if we behave badly, we get bad results. We suffer because we do wrong things. And if people with so much power behave very badly, they impact the world in a really, really bad way. So this created actually excessive risk, and the people who are actually involved in trading, in businesses, took excessive risk, and these actually affected global financial institutions. And there is something called the bursting of the United States housing bubble. And when something bursts, it means it's out of control. It's falling apart. So the housing market was described as a bubble which bursted and creating a lot of a storm. Produce what is described as a perfect storm in the market, housing market in America. So people who actually provided credit, something called mortgaging, and we discussed about mortgage, which is actually a form of credit to buy property in the market term, in the market system. There's market-backed security, MBS, tied to American real estate, as well as a vast wave of derivatives linked to those MBS collapse in value. So the story goes, the value of the mortgage-backed securities, which are actually tied to an American real estate, as well as a vast wave of derivatives linked to those MBS collapse in value. So when something collapses in value, it means an asset. So these securities are actually assets. These are credit terminologies, which was actually involved in the businesses of lending and borrowing to buy property in America. And when you talk about derivatives, it gets its value from something else. It's a fairly complex financial situation and observable in the market, in the financial market institutional arrangements. Financial institutions worldwide suffered severe change, reaching a climax with a bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers on September the 15th, 2008, and a subsequent international banking crisis. So there was a serious banking crisis worldwide, and there's an organization known as Lehman Brothers. It was an underwriting banking system, and this collapsed actually. Lehman Brothers in London, across the globe, in New York. I don't know if it is in New York, but it's an American bank, which is actually one of the biggest banks in the investment underwriting bank in the world. It collapsed on September 15th, 2008, and this triggered actually international banking crisis. So the preconditioning for the financial crisis was complex and multicausal, and so this set a scene of chaos, and the different factors came together to create a lot of problems. Almost 2 decades prior, the U.S. Congress had passed legislation encouraging financial financing for affordable housing. Like I said previously, this problem was triggered by the American government when it set policy to allow private companies to provide public housing. However, in 1999, part of the Glass-Steagall legislation, which had been adopted in 1933, were replaced, permitting financial institutions to commingle their commercial risk-averse and proprietary trading risk-taking operations. There were changes in the law, and some of the laws was actually created to actually regulate the market, to create stability. Like I've said elsewhere, I've actually proposed that in a capitalistic system where crisis, and in marketized economic system, where crisis is quite common, it is always advisable for government to intervene legislatively. Legislatively means the law, and it intervenes such as we saw the Glass-Steagall legislation, which was actually adopted in 1933. This was actually changed, and this was actually it actually confused the financial processes, because permitting financial institutions to commingle their commercial risk-averseness actually when the financial procedures and participants like traders and business operators, they take precautions in terms of risk. They don't just take risk with the money, because there is lending and borrowing involved. So when somebody lends and borrows, you look at the integrity of the borrower. But if somebody is poor and they cannot really borrow the money, I mean, they can borrow the money, but they're not going to pay it back because they're poor. And this is what they're trying to explain in a fairly complex way. I'm trying to break it down a bit so that people understand. We understand, all of us understand, what is really very complicated. This is always the characteristic of the system. Is so complex, and so it modified the behavior, the instincts, the culture of being risk averse. Being risk averse is actually recommendable when you are dealing with risky customers, like people who are actually poor. This is what you see. If you're lending to a poor person, you have to be risk averse. Risk averse means you take precaution. You reluctantly, or you avoid taking risk with lending. So this culture, these customs were actually relaxed, and so there is a confusion in terms of the behavior of marketeers, people who do trading. There was a confusion when the law was actually watered down, if you like. So there's a proprietary trading risk-taking operations. So instead of being strict, they relaxed. The strictness became more compliant with risk-taking. I mean, they became soft on looking at risk. So arguably, the largest contributor to the conditions necessary for financial collapse was the rapid development in predatory financial products, which targeted low-income, low-information home buyers who largely belonged to racial minorities. There was some maybe racism also, or negligence, maybe some form of abuse as well, and also political dishonesty, because this was actually it's a policy which should not have been operational, because, like I said, the private sector is not supposed to be used to give money to people who are vulnerable. Because if you are a minority, you are an ethnic minority without even racism. And racism only make it, because we could talk about racial minorities in America or in the West. And this is a problem because they are the weakest. They are the you know, at the bottom of the pile. You know, if they are poor, they are really, really poor. So this market development went unattended by regulations, and this caught the U.S. government by surprise. But you see, the U.S. government being caught by surprise is something interesting, because they created the situation. I mean, they should have known. We elect who the people we believe are the best. They may not be perfect, but these people should know what they're doing. If they don't know what they're doing, things catches them by surprise, and that's a problem. So after the onset of the crisis, governments deployed massive bailouts of financial institutions and other palliative monetary and fiscal policies to prevent the collapse of the global financial system. So the government reacted to mitigate the situation in the U.S. On the October 3rd, 800 billion Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008 failed to slow the economic free fall, but the similarly sized American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which included a substantial payroll tax credit, saw economic indicators reversed and stabilized less than a month after its February the 17th enactment. So this is some of the action the U.S. government did. It's recorded that on the 3rd of October, 800 billion Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008 failed to slow the economic free fall, but similarly sized American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which included a substantial payroll tax credit, so economic indicators reversed and stabilized less than a month after its February 17th enactment. There are two laws were actually created. One was called involving public spending to the tune of 800 billion Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. When the government spend money in this way, the government is actually dealing with an emergency, with a crisis like the cost of living. It created this problem, and now it's spending public money worth billions. When they talk about economic stabilization, which is actually the law the government put in place, the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, which was actually set in 2008, it also failed. In other words, the government spent $800 billion as an emergency funding to try and stabilize the economy. They back this with legislation, with the law. They set a law to enforce this policy. In other words, this money was given to private companies. They created problem. They destroyed the economy. The government started pumping money into the economy, taxpayers' money, to organizations which are actually multi-billionaires. And some of them are actually probably by combination. If you combine maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of them, they are worth in their trillions. And now the government begin to put this money into the economy, but this money will be used to bail out, to support big businesses, mainly big businesses. And these are multi-million individual investors. This public money is being transferred to them. Like I said in the other videos, that every time there's a crisis, the government take money from the public treasury, public purse, and give it to multimillionaires and multi-billionaires who run the economy, who invest in the economy, because only the rich can invest in the economy. So it's like whenever there's a crisis, like the 2007-2008 financial crisis, and now you have another crisis now, the food, the cost of living crisis now. The government have been supporting the market by taking public money and giving it to energy companies, for example. And it also happened in the financial crisis of 2008. There's something called the capitalization, which means strengthening the economy. Because, we're talking about capitalism. Capital is very important. So when there is a crisis, capital is affected. Capital is what actually is like a seed. It's what the government, what private companies, especially the big companies, what they use to invest in the economy. So when there is a crisis, these are actually lost. How it gets lost is a mystery. It seems to me that it just disappears. Because it is in the economy, it is lost. Probably it went from one rich individual to another. And the government now, our system is, money is lost. There was a mistake. There is a crisis. Traders loses money. Traders lose money, and the government give them more money. And this is what I'm trying to explain. The law, what we'll talk about, what the U.S. government did in setting up this law to spend $8 billion as an emergency program, stabilization facility, but it actually failed to slow the economic free fall. When we talk about economic free fall, we are talking of chaos. Things are actually falling apart. The destruction of the economy. Even though they pumped this money into the economy, it didn't actually help. Things went from bad to worse. But the similarly sized American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. In 2009 again, the government set another law to spend as much as $800 billion. The amount is quite similar to what they spent in 2008, which is actually 800 billion. In other words, another 800 billion or more or less. More or less the same amount was spent in 2009. They call it different things. They call it American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So when you talk about reinvestment, you mean to invest again. So investment, you need money. And normally these are private businesses. They created problem, the government created problem for the private companies which lost billions of money, public money in something called economic stabilization process, and also now American Recovery and Reinvestment Facility in 2008 and 2009. And this included a substantial payroll tax credit. Payroll tax credit is what you give to an employee. When you talk about payroll, we mean salary. People work for an organization. It was an employment policy. It was actually money included in the package, but actually because the government gave money for 800 billion for big businesses to reinvest in the economy, which also included money to be used to keep employee employed. In other words, that's what they're talking about. Using things like tax credit. Tax credit, I mean, the government gives you some money in terms of benefit. This show economic indicators. It also show economic indicators reverse and stabilize less than a month after its February 17 and afterwards. Now there was some response. The main thing to notice is that the government spent a lot of money, gave a lot of money to the private company, public money. The crisis sparked the Great Recession, which resulted in increases in unemployment and suicide and decreases in institutional trust and fertility, among other metrics. So people actually, the crisis actually created a great recession. When the recession is great, it means it is really, really, really bad. And another effect was actually there were mass unemployment. People lost their jobs. And normally when there is a crisis, when people lose their jobs, they lose their income, they lose their livelihood, some people actually commit suicide. Suicide means they kill themselves. They will kill themselves. It is happening now. It happened then in 2007 and 2008 when the financial crisis happened. Government took billions, perhaps also trillions of money, of public money, and gave it to private companies. Number one, people lost their jobs in spite the government trying to support employment through private companies. Also income, like benefit, like tax credit for employees or payroll, infrastructure, trying to do this through the private companies. The same thing happening then is happening now, and people facing crisis, people in the developed world especially, people everywhere where there is crisis, some people are so shocked like now. People are so shocked, some people are actually committing suicide. People are actually so shocked. They didn't expect suffering. This suffering came out of the blue because people just get on with their lives thinking the government is there to look after the economy, and now when they try to get even help from the government, it's so complex, the process is so complicated that people are so not knowing what to do. People are committing suicide. People no longer trust the government. Talk about institutional trust, decreases in institutional trust. They don't trust the government. The government is the biggest institution in the world. When I talk about government, I mean public and private government. I discussed this concept in the previous video. I say some government are private, others are public because of privatization. When the government is privatizing the economy, people think all sorts of situations, but the first thing to be privatized is the government. Now you have big banks, big insurance companies, big corporations. These are governments because they control the economy. They control the legal system. They control the political system. See, the government, some decision the government is not able to take. Some decision, for example, to support ordinary people of Britain, of America, the government is unable because it is afraid of big businesses because they have so much power. So in the process of privatizing the economy, the government privatized because see, the government provide logic through economic system and the infrastructure. If you privatize the economy, you are actually privatizing the government. In a country like Britain or America or wherever, we think privatization is a fanciful exercise. But we are actually selling off our country to private individuals. I've actually mentioned this in the previous video. So We now don't trust our banks. We don't trust our government tax offices, government departments. We don't trust politicians. Politicians is also like parliament, members of parliament. These are actually examples of institutions, some public, some private. People lose trust. And fertility, I don't know what it is, but I think it's something to do with productivity, among other metrics. When there is productivity, then you say there is fertility. It's a very interesting terminology to use under these circumstances. So the recession was a significant precondition for the European debt crisis. So these problems, this recession became actually fundamental in preconditioning the crisis in Europe. Like I said previously, in 2010, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act was enacted in the United States as a response to the crisis, to promote the financial stability of the United States. So all sorts of laws were being actually enacted in response to this crisis, as happened in 2010. There is something called Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform. Wall Street is a trading space within America, within the American financial market in system. So there was an attempt by setting up laws in when we talk about the law in terms of reforming, say for example the Wall Street in America. When we talk about reform, we're talking about the government trying to regulate the market system. So this is when we talk about Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and the Consumer Protection Act. Consumer Protection Act is to protect the consumers. People who ordinary citizens of the country who are now victims of a problem happening in the market system, and so this law was enacted in the United States as a response to the crisis, to promote the financial stability of the United States. So stability means things coming back to normal. There's a crisis, there's instability, which is the opposite of stability. Things fall apart. Things, try to correct what went wrong within the economic system. It's called stabilization, which has occurred in America. So this case study helped to awaken our awareness. So you see, when we think the cost of living is out of the blue, but it's connected to all the previous crises, like I said before. And the Basel III capital and liquidity standards were also adopted by countries around the world. When you talk about things like adapting standard practice by countries, these are actually policies and laws which countries begin to set. These are named. One is the Basel III capital and liquidity standard. Capital is wealth. Liquidity is the kind of wealth resembling money or finance to which you can spend, maybe to invest or to provide, what do you call, financial cash flow, for example, to promote cash flow, so that there is stability. People, companies can spend when they want to spend, when they want to invest. That's what liquidity. So when they call liquidity standards, it means regulation, setting standard, which actually private companies should comply with. These are laws and policies. So the world, the globe, was responding to a problem created in America, and so we can see all the stories, all the background, and all the risk taken, the studies done, research, all the other factors, provided commentaries, the risk involved, the outlook of the economy, risk problem going up and down, the increase of a significant increase of of all sorts of problems during the financial crisis, reflecting an increase in perceived credit risk. Sometimes perception is a major factor in this situation where there is risk, and so something called the Tate spread spike up in July 2007, and it remained volatile for a year, then spiked even higher in September 2008, reaching a record 4.65% on October 10, 2008. This is some of the turmoils, but looking at the background of what happened, and we're looking at factors like the GDP, gross domestic product, the growth rates for 2009 countries in look at recessions, shares in GDP, United States financial sector since 1860. These are studies. Like I said, they are, every time there's a crisis, it's researchers have their works cut out. Sometimes they even make money put on them. If you solve problems, sometimes they make money. And so we talked about Lehman Brothers, the bank, the investment bank, underwriting bank, which was based also in London, but its headquarters is actually in New York. And when it collapsed, because it's so big, the kind of banks, the kind of financial institutions which are actually deemed as being too big to fail. But the 2007 and 8 financial crisis created the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which triggered the global recession. So this crisis sparked the Great Recession. They call it the Great Recession, which at the time was the most severe global recession since the Great Depression. We already made that point previously. It was also followed by the European debt crisis, which began with a deficit in Greece in late 2009, and the 2008 and 2011 Icelandic financial crisis, which involved the bank failure of all 3 of the major banks in Iceland, and relative to the size of its economy, was the largest economic collapse suffered by any country in history. So this is all the stories in Europe now. Like I said, between 2008 to 2011, in Greece, in Iceland, there are financial crisis all over, and the collapse of the economy around the globe, and this was compared to events in the past involving the economic turmoil, but this was considered one of the worst. It was among the 5 worst financial crises the world had experienced, and led to a loss of more than $2 billion, $2 trillion from the global economy. So we're looking at the 21st century in an economy in turmoil in 2008 and 2009, and then we are also looking at the cost of living now, and we know how serious the crisis under capitalism can be, and the increase in cash out, the financing as home value rose, fuel an increase in consumption that could no longer be sustained when home prices decline. So there is all sorts of chaos. The increase in cash out, refinancing. So when you talk of cash refinancing, actually it increased the money supply in the economy, and it also increased the value of homes. Homes actually became expensive, costly, like similar to the cost of living crisis now, which is actually affecting energy crisis. But in turn, we are also experiencing the cost of food. We are actually experiencing the cost of everything. If you go into shops, every item is double or even triple in cost in Europe, in the developed world, but also anywhere in the world. If you add that to corrupt practices in maybe countries which are actually not subjected to civil regulations, like Africa, where everything is the states are failed because of military dictatorship, prolonged military dictatorship and turmoil. Then you are in a situation where you see the chaos of crisis. It's real, and it is worse probably than war. Is the same problem as war. So when there is more money, because because government want to refinance the economy, and this pushes prices up of homes, and the value also going up, and fuel increase in consumption that could no longer be sustained when home prices decline. Now, when home prices decline, then because when the prices go up, people want to buy more. The prices go up, it's called fluctuation. Going up, people struggle, but when the government intervenes, it's an oversupply situation. So the value of homes, the prices of goods and services goes down, the prices go down, and people want to buy more product. And so this becomes unsustainable, which means more chaos, more problem, and many financial institutions own investment whose value was based on home mortgages, such as mortgage-backed security or credit derivatives used to insure them against failure, which decline in value significantly. So the same explanation being given here. We talk about financial institutions. We talk about ownership of investments. The investment, we already said, things you own. When you put money into something, you buy things, you sell things, and the value was actually fake. It was based on mortgages, such as mortgage-backed securities. So securities actually is a credit system, and credit derivatives are going to talk about used to insure them against failure. So when you talk of derivative, you mean value which depend on some other value in terms of asset. That means it is fake. It is actually shadow sort of wealth. looks like wealth, it feels like wealth, but it's not. Like you're holding something in your hand to represent a value which you don't see. And these are actually some of the systems actually introduced within the financial mechanism. It's called mortgage-backed security, mortgage credit. Securities actually guarantees for credit, and mortgages are credit for buying homes. And information saying financial institutions were owning investments whose values was based on home mortgages, such as mortgage-backed securities. So home mortgages borrowed by home buyers, people who want housing, domestic housing. Like we said, the government allowed people who didn't even have money, people on low income, people who should not even be given to buy property, they allowed them to borrow money. And financial institutions were owning fake wealth, because this wealth was based on credit. This credit was actually given to people who are poor. Normally, when government was these financial institutions were trusting government as knowing what they were doing, or probably they were colluding with government if they were corrupt. Nobody knows, because these people operate behind the scene. They are private companies. They are not accountable to the public. They are not regulated normally by public institutions. So whatever they do it behind the scene. And when they create problems from there, you don't know the truth. They are very complex. They are very advanced. These are some. I mean, if they steal something, if there's a conspiracy, we wouldn't know, because the system is extremely complicated. Financial system is so complicated. So things like mortgage, things like security, home mortgages, all these things need to be explained to ordinary people like you and I. And things like derivatives. You use this as insurance. Insurance is a guarantee that, don't worry, you are insured. I mean, don't worry. If something happens, you're covered. And you begin to trust in fake news, like some people will say. And the insurance was against failure, but failure happened, and it occurred that the trust, the belief, the trust in the system was actually forlorn, was actually fake, and which declined in value significantly. These assets actually declined in value because there were no assets. They were actually very strange kind of valuation of assets in the market economy. And the International Monetary Fund estimated that large US and European banks lost more than $1 trillion on toxic assets and from bad loans from January 2007 to September 2009. So the IMF is actually a financial institution, a global financial institution, which actually is involved in lending and borrowing in the credit economic system. It is actually the powerhouse of international credit economy. Which credit economy actually is a type of shadow economy. Shadow means it is if you are walking on the sun, or you are walking under a light, you look at your shadow. Your shadow means it is not real. You may be real, but your shadow is not real. Credit economy is shadow because it is representative of what is real. But the entire economy now is operated on shadow values. You see, it looks like the real thing, with technology, with engineering, with different complex instrumentations. This shadow economic system, financing, selling and buying, the marketizing, it looks real, but it's totally fake. It's fake money. It's fake news, like Donald Trump, former U.S. president, normally say this is fake news. So the financial crisis was created by fake economy, which is actually economy of credit system. And the International Monetary Fund is actually the mother and father of all credit economy, which is actually a scheduled form of economic relationship and practices. So it estimated that large U.S. and European banks, these are corporate banks, it's multi-billionaires, multi-trillionaires in value. They lost more than 1 trillion on toxic assets. Toxic assets actually the asset which is now rotten. It's like cancer. It has become destructive. But this is created by the credit economic system, which only the architect of economic infrastructure of economic imperial system, they are the only ones who know. You and I may or may not know. Why they do that, only they can tell us. So the banks lost more than 1 trillion on toxic assets. These are actually the assets I was trying to say. The assets which are no assets, they are actually fake. And from bad loans. Bad loans mean loans which were not paid back. This is bad loans. And this is some of the problem, the rotten seed of capitalism invested in fake economic infrastructure. I don't know where they have put all the proper wells. I mean, why should an economy, a national economy, operate on the credit system? Why is that? Because the rich, the super rich, have eaten their money on the earth, on the ground. I don't. They are so rich, they don't want to use their money. They want to borrow, and this borrowing is even fake because it's representative. The actual value do not actually apply to investment. So it's like people say there are people who actually use facts and figures as if it is money. Money which it's like somebody comes and say I'm a multi-billionaire, but they are not. They don't have anything. As far as the economic space is concerned. That was why the economy collapsed in America. And the problem created at that time, it created poverty for people who are already poor. That same problem made people who are multi-billionaires, multi-trillionaires very rich. So they created economic problem, and they actually were rewarded for failure. For like thieves stealing, stealing money from banks. Like thieves really like robbing somebody, and they're actually rewarded for it. They are paid for being thieves, for being criminals. Instead of putting them into prison, they are given billions of pounds. And that's what's happening now also with the cost of living. People responsible for managing our economy failing. I know there was war in Ukraine, but the government should work with the big government, big organization, should use sensible economic practices to mitigate on the problem to do with the cost of living. But you see, the reason the cost of living is happening because energy company put the prices of energy up. They are so rich, and if you ask them why did you put the cost of energy up, knowing that there are people who need help in this country, you should have actually reduced it. You would still make money. But because they are so irresponsible, they are so greedy, and they are so reckless, they don't care about anybody. They don't care about anything. All they care about is money. In other words, every time there's a crisis, they make more money than they know what to use the money for. This is unfair. To put it mildly, it is unfair, and the government is creating a lot of problems by giving so much power to private individuals who create all sorts of havoc and make money of this havoc they actually create. So this crisis rapidly spread into a global economic shock, resulting in several bank failures. We already mentioned that the economies worldwide slowed during this period since credit tightened and international trade declined. When the economy worldwide, the global economy slows down, that is when poverty begins to be felt. Poor people begin to suffer. The rich have already taken their money. Then they took this money from the government, so that the government no longer has money to spend on public services. And that's why now more and more public services are closing down, because during the period of the recession, the government gave almost all the money to private companies. So the government didn't have money to spend on public sector. So it started something called reform. Reform, we've been closing down public sector. And that's why there is a cost of living for the poor and the many. Unless the government changes the way it manages the economy, the cost of living is just the beginning. And we're going to see this happening. So housing market suffered and unemployment soared, resulting in evictions and foreclosures. People are getting evicted now. They were evicted then. Foreclosures mean the houses are being shut down, being closed down. Because if they don't make money, this is the behavior of the private businesses. If the private businesses don't make money, they close the business down. And that's why the government is failing, because instead of managing things like housing, which is actually a basic necessity, things like energy, things like food, which are basic necessity, is selling this thing of the private company, which are not really suited to supply. They close it down. As we speak, probably energy companies are shutting down. Every time you hear, if you are a customer, maybe you are a customer of a gas or electricity or water company, utility. Every time you hear of merger, something called merger, means one company is taking over, bigger companies are taking over smaller ones. If the government, if the company fails, it sells the business to another business. And during the process, people lose their jobs. And there's a shutdown. The business become like smaller, because that's what efficiency means. Efficiency means cost cutting. Cost cutting should not apply on basic necessities like food, energy, water, medicine, schools, public transport. And this is a mistake created by the government because of capitalism, which is extreme. In UK, in America, in Europe, there is a shift to the right, which is actually meaning the economic system is becoming extreme. Everything is becoming commercialized, and people are actually allowing that. They are very happy. Government is selling them, private company is very good because it's going to help you, it's going to improve standard. Yes, it does. But if you don't have money, you are going to be excluded. Unfortunately, the majority of the people in the world are going to be excluded from the economy. So, including housing, several businesses failed during the 2008, during the credit crunch. Businesses are failing now. The businesses which fail are mainly small and medium, shut down first. Public businesses like the public sector shuts down because there's no funding. And then finally, big corporations shut down. And this is a trend. Every time there's a crisis, there's a shutdown. Right now, small and medium businesses are shutting down again. Big businesses will start shutting down. Tesco, Sainsbury's, hospitals, things which were corporatized. Corporation mean, bringing small businesses together to become big. Bringing mean big businesses buy small ones and they shut down and they reduce the economy. What that means in practice is that within the economic framework, less and less people will have access to goods and services. That means the majority of the population, if this continues, this behavior, if it continues, over 90% will be excluded completely from the economy because big business will shut down altogether. They will only leave enough for the few because only the few will have money to spend. In a capitalistic system, in the marketized economic system, if you don't have money, you don't get anything. And that's why the government is making a mistake by shutting down the public sector. Public sector is the only economy which help people who do not have money. People who do not have money are actually employees, people who work for a living. Like I said previously, so people who don't work for a living, people who work for a living are more than 90% of the population. The working class, the middle class, and the lower class. The upper class can afford, but there will come a time when people who are rich will fall out of wealth and will join us. So, because that's how the direction of economic travel. Less and less people, maybe 2%, ultimately will own wealth. They will be the only one being served by the market economic system. The rest of the economy will close down because that is what they should do. Businesses which does not make money should be closed down. So if 95%, for example, of the global population cannot, if they don't have money, because that is what's happening, the government is taking money from the many and giving it to the few, which means there will come a time when, and there's closing down public sector. There will come a time when the public sector shuts down totally, and the private companies will also shut down. There will only be 2% left, which means only 2% who has money will actually have an economy. The rest of the economy is going to be shut down, which means the rest of the population are going to die. Because rich people don't give money to the poor. The government will shut down the public system as we know it. It has now shut down. What is left is now being clear. Everything is being transferred from public to private. Private businesses do not help people. If the economy, if their businesses no longer make profit, they close it down. So we gave our country to individuals who are shutting it down. We are going to be left without an economy. That means we are going to die if the government doesn't change the way it behaves. The government behavior is really insane. So several businesses fail. This is what happened in 2008. It's failing now from its peak in the second quarter of 2007 at 61.4 trillion household wealth in the United States fell $11 trillion to 59.4 trillion by the end of the first quarter of 2009, resulting in resulting in a decline in consumption, then a decline in business investment. That's what I'm talking about. Decline in business investment means shut down. If you don't invest in a business, that business closes, shuts down. That's what I was talking. Consumption means people who buy goods and services. They also stop because they don't have the money. When you talk about income in trillion, tens of trillions of US dollars, that was what happened then. This is what will happen now, because now people are losing their jobs and they cannot get benefit, because benefit is a public sectoral system. Because the government shut down the public sector, it cannot give benefit to people. Government is saying they're giving benefit to people. Now with immigration, they cannot deal with it because they cannot allow immigrants to come here. Immigrants who are coming here depend on public money because they don't have a country. So the government within law, international law, are supposed to take refugees and people who are actually running away from their country because of either whatever problem it is. Every government of the world have signed treaties to do that, but they can no longer do it in practice because the government globally, public services, public sector is closing down. What is left is now private sector. Private sector is also closing down because of crisis. There's always crisis, and the government is closing down. There will be no bailout in the future. Probably there is not going to be bailout now because the government do no longer have money. They try their best to give money to the private businesses. We don't know where they put the money. So this is a system of insanity, but we are culturally bankrupt. So we continue to accept insanity in our world. In the fourth quarter of 2008, the quarter-over-quarter decline in real GDP, gross domestic product, in the US was 8.4%. We're talking about the United States of America, but we also talk about how it impacts the globe, including Europe and Africa and the rest of the world. The US unemployment rate peaked at 11% in October 2009, the highest rate since 1983, and roughly twice the pre-crisis rate. You talk about joblessness, people losing their jobs. Then, and that is happening now. And after the current cost of living crisis, there's going to be another crisis. There have been several crises since the financial breakdown of 2008. There has been, after that, there has been a couple of other crises, but the major one has been Brexit and COVID-19, and we had the war in Ukraine, and now we have the cost of living crisis. Afterward, brace yourself for another one. The average hours per week, per work week declined to 33, the lowest level since the government began collecting the data in 1964. So this is actually, people are actually losing their jobs, and their jobs are not available. The economic crisis started in the United States but spread to the rest of the world. US consumption accounted for more than a third of the growth in global consumption. Between 2000 and 2007, and the rest of the world depended on the US consumer as a source of demand, because the United States is the biggest economy in the world. So, so consumption was disrupted. Toxic securities were owned by corporate and institutional investors globally. So, with toxic security, we talked about that already. So, this is the value they own in terms of wealth, which is absolutely fake. Derivatives such as credit default swaps also increase the linkage between large financial institutions. So, default swaps, credit default swaps, derivatives, so such as credit default swap. So if you swap something, you're probably exchanging things, because there is selling and buying, the essence of the economy. Trade is actually selling and buying. So derivatives, I already explained that these are values which derive its value from real assets. These are fake assets which are actually representative of real value, and they are used like real assets in the financial system. The leveraging of financial institutions as assets was sold to pay back obligations that could not be refinanced in frozen credit market, further accelerated the solvency crisis and caused a decrease in international trade. So effective trade, the leveraging actually means financing, things like capitalization, normally used by borrowing. So when you take spending, financing from the financial system, then it chaos and assets were sold to pay back obligations. Obligations actually, when you owe somebody money, then you have to pay them back, and then companies begin to sell assets, and this actually creates something called deleveraging, which is actually money you need to invest, and so it further accelerated the solvency crisis. Solvency, when you are when you're bankrupt, and so when the economy cannot perform in the global sense, then it actually reduces international trade. International trade in a globalized economic system is the bread and butter of modern economy. Reduction in the growth rates of developing countries were due to falls in trade, commodity prices, investment into the remittances sent from migrant workers, example Armenia. So if you travel people are traveling from Africa, from different worlds because of globalization, from one country to look for work, and one day is problem, the repercussion is obvious, almost is up and then it's happening now. The states with fragile political system feared that investors from Western states would withdraw their money because of prices. Because Africa, for example, and the rest of the world get their money by borrowing from Europe. When this problem in America or Europe get into trouble, then the financial system collapsing, the credit economy collapsing, Africa and other developed countries and also developed countries fail to borrow, and the problem just keep getting worse and worse. As part of the national fiscal policy response to the Great Recession, government and central banks, including the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England, provided then unprecedented trillions of dollars in bailouts and in stimulus, including expansive fiscal policy and monetary policy to offset the decline in consumption and lending capacity, to avoid a further collapse, encouraging lending, restore faith in the integral commercial paper market, avoid the risk of a deflationary spiral, and provide banks with enough funds to allow customers to withdraw money, customer withdrawals. So there is the linking of crisis. Fiscal policy is when the government actually is looking at factors like interest rates, mainly to control inflation, and as part of the national fiscal policy response to the Great Recession, Government and central banks, including the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England, provided then unprecedented trillions of dollars in bailouts and stimulus, including expansive fiscal policy and monetary policy to offset the decline in consumption and lending capacity, avoid a further collapse in current lending, restore faith in the integral commercial paper market, avoid the risk of an inflationary spiral, and provide banks with enough funds to allow customers to make withdrawals. So the government gave money to big institutions, like I said previously. That's what they took when they talk about fiscal policy response. This time they actually reduced the interest rate. When they reduce interest rate, it means they want people to borrow money. But where is the money? The money is with the government, who will provide some guarantees. And then when banks were bailed out, I mean they capitalized, whatever you want to call it, the money was given so that people can actually, so that the financial system began to function as it used to be, including borrowing. Because you see, like I said previously, the financial system is based on lending and borrowing, the credit economic system. That is actually at the core of financing of the global economy, is actually credit economy. So all these policies was actually to put money into the economy so that people can borrow, so that banks can invest, to offset the decline in consumption. People, if they consume mean they are spending money, then they have to borrow it, and lending capacity, avoid further collapse, and encourage lending, more lending, and restore faith in the integral commercial paper markets, like printing money probably, I'm not sure, avoiding risk of a deflationary spiral. Deflation is opposite of inflation, which means there's less money supply. Inflation means there's more, it reduces the value of assets, and provide banks with enough funds to allow customers to make withdrawals. In effect, the central banks went from being the lender of last resort to the lender of only resort for a significant portion of the economy. Conventions were breached. In other words, in some cases, the Fed was considered the buyer of last resort. During the fourth quarter of 2008, these central banks purchased US dollar worth 2.5 trillion of government debt and doubled private assets from banks. The amount of borrowing, when they buy during the fourth quarter of 2008, the central bank purchased US 2.5 trillion of government debt and troubled private assets from banks. So if you buy debt, in other words, if you buy debt, you're actually giving free money, because debt is worthless. It's fictitious economy, because if something is already dead, how can you buy it? You don't buy debts because it's nothing. It's a negative value. You cannot buy a negative value. This is actually a trick being played by capitalists in the market economy, which doesn't function honestly. You see, you don't buy debt. Debt cannot be bought. When government talks about buying debt, they are giving free money to private companies. 2.5 trillion of government debt and troubled private assets from banks. Government debt, these are things like bonds or whatever. These are complete nonsense of economic relationship, and this is what drives our economy. Look at it as a system of credit. which is actually, for me personally, is a form of corruption, big scale. It's a way of transferring wealth from the poor to free money. The government gives free money during crisis. It gives free money during crisis to the rich, taking it from the poor. So when it talks about government debt, I mean, you don't buy debts. What kind of rubbish is that? Following the model initiated by the 2008 United Kingdom Bank Rescue Package, the governments of European nations and the United States guaranteed the debt issued by their banks to raise the capital of their national banking systems, ultimately purchasing 1.5 trillion newly issued preferred stock in many banks. Preferred stock. The Federal Reserve created then significant amount of new currency as a method to combat the liquidity trap. This is money. Liquidity means money you can spend. Bailouts came in the form of trillions of dollars of loans, asset purchase, guarantees, and direct sending. When you talk assets being purchased in this situation, these assets are actually no asset at all. Significant controversy accompanied the bailouts, such as in the case of the AIG bonus payment controversy, leading to the development of a variety of decision-making frameworks to help balance competing policy interests during times of financial crisis. While they were losing money, while their companies were collapsing, they were busy paying themselves big monies. Because these monies are actually figures, they are just fake money which is created within the shadow economy, shadow banking. Alistair Darling, the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time of the crisis, stated in 2008 that Britain came within hours of the breakdown of law and order the day that Royal Bank of Scotland was bailed out. Some of the security and political ramifications of this problem, instead of financing more domestic loans, some banks instead spent some of the stimulus money in more profitable areas, such as investing in emerging markets and foreign currencies. China increased its standing as a responsible global actor during the crisis. When Western countries were nearing financial disaster, China created credit for spending on infrastructure. So China was practicing real economics, but the Western powers were practicing unreal economics. China was honest practitioner in the global economic relationship. The West were corrupt or ignorant, whichever way. China's exceptional performance during the crisis made its elites more confident that the global balance of power was shifting in China's favor. China now is the second biggest economy after America, after the United States of America. In July 2010, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act was enacted in the United States to promote financial stability of the United States. The Basel III capital and liquidity standards were adopted worldwide. Since the 2008 financial crisis, consumer regulators in America have more closely supervised sellers and credit cards and have mortgages in order to deter anti-competitive practices that lead to crises. This is some of the attempts by the government to reform the market. At least two major reports on the causes of the crisis were produced by the U.S. Congress. The Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission report released January 2011 and a report by the United States Senate Homeland Security Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations entitled Wall Street and the Financial Crisis, Anatomy of the Financial Collapse, released April 2011. Some of the government responses to the crisis: in total, 47 bankers served jail time as a result of the crisis, over half of which were from Iceland, where the crisis was the most severe and led to the collapse of all three major Icelandic banks. In April 2012, Gerhard of Iceland became the only politician to be convicted as a result of the crisis. Now, when you convict somebody and conviction means they have committed a crime, probably fraud, probably some other form of theft, and this is the problem. So, this is the cultural failure in the Western world. Only one banker in the United States served jail term as a result of the crisis. Karim Serageldin, a banker at Credit Suisse, who was sentenced to 30 months in jail and returned $24.6 million in compensation for manipulating bond prices to hide $1 billion of losses. So there was corruption in the banking practices. The people who led the banking, the financial institution, the economy of the United States of America were thieves. No individuals in the United Kingdom were convicted as a result of the crisis. For one reason or another, Goldman Sachs paid $550 million US to settle fraud charges after alleging anticipating the crisis and selling toxic investments to its clients. So it was actually defrauding their clients with fewer resources and risks in creative destruction. A number of patent applications was flat compared to exceptional increases in patent applications in prior years. Now, when the government refuses to regulate the bank, basically this is what you get: failure to regulate. Something called free enterprises. Now, free enterprises is a myth. It's a myth in a society where people are actually immature. Immaturity leads to violence, criminality, theft, murder. Because you see, if you take money for the country, especially if you are a multimillionaire you still steal money, which should be given to how people who have no money. The capitalist system have over the decades stolen money from the poor and given it to the rich. And the crisis of 2008 and 2007 and 2008 is a typical example. It's happening now with the cost of living crisis. Government still, during this crisis, the government colludes with the market institutions to take money from the poor and give it to the rich. There may be excuses, some of them may be legitimate excuses. that the economy needs to be supported. You cannot support the economy if thieves and murderers, criminals in other words, are the one running the economy, super rich. And this explains why there are certain individuals who are actually rich and others are not rich. They are rich because of corruption. And the system is so corrupt, the government is also corrupt, because the government should have arrested more people, including in Britain, because the system is the same. It's called capitalism. People only think about money and think about more money. The competition is actually controlled by finance. The more money you have, the more survivability you have. People are actually pushed to the limit to steal, to kill, and to destroy a country in order to survive. This is a jungle practice. It's lawlessness. It's actually not civilization. It's backwardness. It's actually we are living in a stone age. Our cities may glitter, our streets may shine. You see, we may look like we are modern man, we are, but because of our cultural failure, we have become thieves, murderers, and destroyers of society. This needs to change. The government, if it still exists, if its soul is still existing, it has to start bringing changes, intervening in the economy even now. You see, spoiling multimillionaires and treating them like spoiled brats, children who are actually spoiled, created the 2007 and 2008 financial crisis. It is now creating the energy company and all these other players, big players, are creating the cost of living. That's pricing. And also, because of negligence of the government, say for example in the UK and America, the global government is failing the people of the globe by allowing multi-billionaire and multi-millionaire to behave the way they want, taking money from the poor and piling this money into their pockets. I don't know where the hell they put it. People are going to die because of injustice, because of violence, because of evil. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't subscribed. If you have watched up to this time, make sure you don't watch it in vain. Click like, click notification bell for new videos.